In Christian iconography, it is not uncommon to show the four rivers with the tree of life, both in depictions of the Garden of Eden and in the New Jerusalem. Another emblem also frequently included in this scene is an altar with a lamb on top, the Agnus Dei, or Lamb of God, representing Christ. The lamb is usually wounded in the jugular vein and pouring forth blood into a chalice. It is implied that the blood is the source of the four rivers, which both issue from and also feed the tree of life. Sometimes a fountain is also included in the picture, demonstrating the idea that the water is available to drink. These are the living waters that Jesus invited his followers to imbibe. They consist of his blood, spilled in sacrifice, as any Christian theologian will tell you. Thomas Jefferson said that the tree of liberty must be watered with the blood of patriots. And similarly, the divine tree of immortality must be watered with the blood of holy sacrifice. Interestingly, there are also rivers in the underworld. The Greeks said there were 5 main ones: Styx, Lethe, Acheron, Phlegethon, and Cocytus. Acheron is the one that separates the land of the dead from the land of the living. It is the one that a person must cross when they die, with the help of a ferryman, who must be paid a coin for his troubles. The Greeks believed that Elysium, the paradise land for the righteous deceased, was essentially a chamber within the otherwise totally unpleasant underworld. Similarly, the way the Old Testament portrays it, everybody went to the underworld, which they called Sheol, with no exceptions. There, everyone would await the final judgment and the coming of the Messiah. Everything there was torment. However, there was a bubble of safety called the bosom of Abraham, in which the righteous were separated out so that they could enjoy the wait in comfort, while everyone else burned in hell. There was a river that acted as a chasm of separation, keeping those in the bosom of Abraham safe from the hell that surrounded them. Jesus preached about it in Luke chapter 16, verses 22 to 27, comparing the afterlife fates of a bad rich man and a good poor man. Now the poor man died and was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom, and the rich man also died and was buried. In Hades he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus so that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I am in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Between us and you there is a great chasm fixed, so that those who wish to come over from here to you will not be able, and that none may cross over from there to us. If you consider that perhaps the bosom of Abraham and paradise are the same thing, and the river surrounding it is Acheron, then that means that the underworld has 4 rivers, and within that realm is paradise or Eden with its own 4 rivers. There is also a common river between them that is actually a void space separating the two. There is another way to think of it. Recall that the Sumerian god Enki was depicted with the Tigris and Euphrates rivers coming from his back as he sat on his throne in the Absu, or abyss. The name of Enki's underground house, the Absu, literally meant the waters of knowledge. Therefore, perhaps 2 of the rivers of Eden actually come from the abyss below, and the tree of knowledge was watered by these. These could also be the waters of the baptism of wisdom of Baphomet. Herein we find a possible connection with the game of Ageo, as well as the story Cain told us about the flood and fall of Atlantis which lies behind it. Enki seems roughly equivalent to Poseidon, the father of the Atlantean kings. Poseidon was said to reside in a place called Agi, in a grand temple built upon a hill there. One of the epithets he was known by was Poseidon Aegeus. He was also called Mover of the Earth and the Barren Sea, as he was considered to be responsible for earthquakes, tsunamis, and sea storms. The location of Aige has been traced to an ancient settlement near modern Aegira in western Greece. In the Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian myths, Enki is one of the gods who was involved in the creation of mankind. As the story goes, the gods decided that it was too much work to keep creation going, so they made humans as a slave race to do the work for them. The tablets are in bad condition, and the translations have always been sketchy, but in the Babylonian Enuma Elish, it appears that they created mankind to manufacture something for their consumption, which is frequently interpreted as being, quote, bread. Ancient astronaut theorists bandy about the idea, proposed in the books of Zecharia Sitchin, that the Sumerian gods were aliens from another planet, and they made humans to mine gold for them in Africa, which they needed, supposedly, for their far-off civilization. But that's not what the texts say. They say that the gods created us to keep the cosmos working, and to make for them something that they needed. If it was gold, it probably wasn't common gold. However, it may have been more akin to the gold of the alchemists, which is made with the philosopher's stone. The images of Enki sitting on a box containing a network of water pots all flowing into one another greatly resembles the images of athanors and other glass vessels connected via tubes in the laboratories of alchemists. Maybe that is actually what it is depicting. Enki was the god of wisdom and magic, and he is credited with creating several species of animals, in addition to humans, in what sounds like a laboratory. Hybrid species abound in these stories, as the gods themselves were frequently depicted with the body parts of fish, goats, bulls, and other animals. These are the types of creatures that show up in every alchemical treatise from the Middle Ages and Renaissance. The adept can reportedly create things like this through the hidden science of transmuting matter and extracting souls from bodies. Enki's alchemy lab in the Absu was sometimes called the House of Life. To the Akkadians and Babylonians, he was known as Ea. This is from the same Semitic root word that Eve of Genesis gets her name, Hyy, meaning life. Enki's wife, Ninhursag, was nicknamed Ninti, which means Lady Rib. This may be connected to the story of Eve being created from Adam's rib bone, because Ninhursag was also called the mother of all living. These are the exact words we find in Genesis chapter 3, verse 20. And Adam called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. She is given this name immediately after their expulsion from the garden, and immediately after they are cursed to forevermore to eat in sorrow and in the sweat of thy face. Recall that Adam and Eve were created and placed inside of the garden, to dress it and to keep it, and to till the ground. The word husband means tiller of the soil, and Adam was the first, with his wife as his helpmeet. Cain followed in Adam's footsteps as a, quote, tiller of the ground, but Adam's husbandry must have been different from Cain's, for before Cain was conceived they were cast from the garden and told, cursed is the ground for thy sake, in sorrow shalt thou eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. So perhaps what was going on in the Garden of Eden was gardening of another sort, what the alchemists called celestial agriculture. Note that in myth and legend, eating certain foods can cause you to translate from one dimension to another, just like in Lewis Carroll's Adventures of Alice. If you have traveled through a portal to another world, eating the food there can cause you to get stuck there. Adam and Eve were thrown out of the garden upon eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge. Thus began all living and also death, for God had told the man and woman that upon eating that fruit they would surely die. Adam was then barred from the tree of life, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat, and live forever. Likewise we know that Persephone became condemned to stay in the underworld when, in her hunger, she devoured 6 pomegranate seeds while there. As I mentioned, Baphomet told me that Brian was cursed with lethargy because he owed 6 seeds to the demon. One can only wonder what manner of existence was happening in the Garden of Eden before they ate the forbidden fruit that caused life and death to begin. Adam and Eve were told to freely eat from every tree in the garden. Genesis chapter 2, verse 16. Before that, remember, in Genesis chapter 1, God told them, I have given you every herb-bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. The words fruit and seed are often used in the Bible to indicate children, offspring, and descendants, as they are in common parlance today. Knowledge in the Bible often refers to the carnal knowledge of sex. The word tree could indicate the generations of a family of blood relatives. So we are back once again to the subject of blood, the water of life, it seems. In particular, the fruit of the vine, the grape is used, and scripture, and literature of all sorts, to represent blood. just as the wine of the Eucharist is viewed as the blood of Jesus. The vine, then, is, again, the family tree. There is an interesting line in the book of Isaiah that appears to refer to God himself keeping a vineyard to make red wine, and announcing his intention to water it at every moment. This line comes right after one in which the Lord promises to punish Leviathan and slay the dragon that is in the sea. As it says in Isaiah chapter 27, verses 1-3, "In that day the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan the piercing serpent, even Leviathan that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. In that day sing ye unto her, a vineyard of red wine. I the Lord do keep it. I will water it every moment. Lest any hurt it, I will keep it night and day." This may be related to the messianic promise that God will let the righteous feast on the flesh of Leviathan. Perhaps they will be permitted to drink of his blood too. Maybe Leviathan's blood will be part of the rivers of living waters in the New Jerusalem, issuing from the throne of God. We know that according to St. John, in the last days, a third of the sea will turn to blood. Revelation chapter 8, verse 8 says, "And the second angel sounded, and, as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood." We further know that Jesus turned water into wine at the wedding at Cana, something that Baphomet tried to take credit for. Baphomet also emphasized that turning water into wine could be used as alchemical metaphor. At the Last Supper, Jesus promised his disciples he would drink the fruit of the vine with them in his Father's kingdom. Also, in Revelation chapter 7, verse 16-17, John says of the righteous citizens of the New Jerusalem, "They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them and shall lead them unto living fountains of waters." We know that those waters are depicted in Christian iconography as the blood issuing forth from the neck of a sacrificial lamb on an altar. Jews were certainly not allowed to consume blood, as I mentioned earlier, but Jesus is clearly telling people to make an exception and drink his blood. In the Jewish sacrificial system, the blood was reserved for God himself because it contained life. Mortals who had their own life, albeit in short duration, were told not to touch it. Jesus, of course, is viewed as God incarnate and part of the Holy Trinity. So would his blood be similar to ichor, the golden fluid in the veins of the Greek gods? The living waters of the New Jerusalem are said to be clear as crystal. Also, in Revelation chapter 5, verse 8, St. John witnesses the Lamb of God being offered golden vials full of odors, which are the prayers of the saints. With these things in mind, let us look at the story of Tantalus, who was one of the sons of Zeus and immortal. According to Edith Hamilton's mythology, Timeless Tales of Gods and Heroes, Tantalus was honored by the gods beyond all the mortal children of Zeus. He frequently dined with the gods on Mount Olympus, eating ambrosia. At one point, he stole some of the holy food and shared it with some of his human companions. This was taboo. He also illegally passed on some top-secret divine intelligence that humans were not supposed to know. For these crimes, he was chastised. However, this was not what got him consigned to the worst tortures of Tartarus in Hades eternally, where he is tormented with an apple that he can't eat and water that he can't drink. This happened because he murdered his own son Pelops, or sacrificed him, as some chroniclers put it. He then chopped him up and tried to feed his meat to the gods. The way the story is told in some cases is as though he had invited the gods to a banquet that he was throwing for them, just as he had been a guest at their table. However, since his son's death is described sometimes as a sacrifice, and knowing what we know about how deities eat sacrificial offerings, it makes sense to consider that the table which he invited them to was probably an altar. According to the myth, the gods knew what the meat was that they were being offered. That is why they all refused to eat it, except for Demeter, who accidentally ate some of the shoulder because she was distraught with grief over her daughter Persephone, who had been kidnapped by Hades. Afterwards, the boy was resurrected, with his remains being placed in a magical cauldron. Hephaestus fashioned a prosthetic shoulder for him out of ivory. Demeter literally means Mother Earth. So it was the earth that ate Pelops absent-mindedly, just as Genesis says she opened her mouth to receive the blood of Abel. In his book The Holy Grail, its origins, secrets, and meaning revealed, Malcolm Godwin recounts the details of an Arthurian legend about the Ship of Solomon, which purportedly contained wood taken from trees that were descended from the Tree of Life in the Garden of Eden. As he writes, when Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden, Eve still carried a part of the branch of the Tree of Life which she planted, and it took root. The twig became a tree, but white as snow, signifying the pure soul and the virgin body. For at the time Eve plucked it from the tree in Eden, she was still a virgin. Abel was conceived beneath that tree, which then turned green. God curses Cain and the earth upon which the blood of Abel had been spilled, except for the tree, which underwent a transformation, becoming red in remembrance of the blood of Abel. The shoots from the tree were each red, white, and green, and it was from these trees that Solomon's wife had cut the 3 posts around the bed of the ship. So here we have a myth that combines the idea of the Tree of Life being watered by the blood of the martyred Abel, causing it to turn red and virile, springing forth more trees, with the idea of a ship, an ark. But what is really interesting here is the claim that Eve indeed dared to put forth her hand and take also of the Tree of Life. This is exactly what God told his unnamed companions in Genesis chapter 22 that he feared would happen. There is no mention of her eating the fruit of that tree in this Grail story, but she was able to grow another tree, so presumably this would have been possible. Returning to the story of Pelops, we learn that this unfortunate soul was the father of Atreus, patriarch of the accursed house which resulted in Menelaus and Agamemnon, who started the Trojan War. Atreus did to his own nephew what his grandfather had done to Atreus' father. He killed him, cut him up, and served him to the boy's father, his brother Thyestes, as part of a fraternal vendetta. Significantly, the nephew's name was Tantalus, just like his eternally damned great-grandfather, who started the infanticidal, brephophagic family tradition. Now, are we really going to believe that the original Tantalus wasn't influenced to sacrifice and serve the meat of his firstborn son to the gods because of what he'd seen at their own dinner table on Olympus? He had been initiated into the secrets of their ambrosia. Supposedly, the gods were too civilized to eat human meat, perhaps most especially that of someone like Pelops, who was still 1/4 divine in lineage. Yet we know they weren't above the rape and enslavement of such people. There are dozens of such stories, including that of Pelops himself. This poor lad was kidnapped by Poseidon upon being resurrected, and then taken to Mount Olympus to serve the gods as an Ereminos, a prostitute. Later, Pelops was purportedly thrown out of Olympus as a punishment because he couldn't get over his anger at his father Tantalus, the man who had murdered him. That doesn't really square with the claim that it was the murder of Pelops that brought about the extreme punishment meted to Tantalus in Tartarus. Furthermore, wasn't giving away ambrosia and the secrets of the gods to humans, including most likely the secret of what ambrosia was, in fact his biggest crime against the gods? Isn't this a much more likely reason for them to imprison and torture him? Is the story of the murder of Pelops told in such a way as to obscure what the gods were really eating at their banquets on the holy mountain? What made Tantalus think to feed them the flesh of his son in the first place? In The White Goddess, Robert Graves theorized that the story of Tantalus was doctored for political reasons. He states, Tantalus belonged to the old religion superseded by Olympianism, and the Olympian priests have deliberately misinterpreted the icons in favor of Father Zeus by presenting him as an odious criminal. Tantalus's crime, the mythographers explain, was that, having been privileged to eat ambrosia, the food of the gods, with Olympians, he later invited commoners to try it. Perhaps in these older religions, where human sacrifice was rampant, the priests were more open about what the gods wanted to eat, whereas in later religions these things were wrapped in allegory. Now we really get down to the crux of the issue. In every major culture, they say that their immortal gods, who live in an unreachable realm on high, maintain their immortal status via consumption of a special food. They keep the location of this food a secret, along with the mystery of what it is. The holy place is both psychically and physically guarded by creatures of terrifying countenance. For those outsiders who dare to penetrate this forbidden realm, there is reserved the most awful of punishments. So, too, for those apostates among their own realm and their privileged guests at that august table who profane the mysteries by sharing the bread of life and its secret recipe with those who have not been invited to dine thereof. As soon as Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, God became concerned that they would stretch forth their hands, take from the tree of life, and live forever. Since the tree of life was mentioned previously in Genesis, but in narration to the reader and not as the quoted voice of God speaking to Adam, we can infer something. God was not concerned that they would eat from the tree of life until after they ate from the tree of knowledge. This implies that the fruit of life was located somewhere that was inaccessible to them before they ate of the tree of knowledge. With what they had gained from eating the first forbidden fruit, it became conceivable that they might be able to access the fruit of life as well. It is like a parent who is not concerned about the baby putting his fingers in the electrical outlet until the day that he learns to crawl, and isn't concerned about the knives in the drawer until he can stand up. But there is no reason to believe that the erection of this barrier between us and the tree of life was done for our own good. All we know for certain is that the gods don't want us to have that fruit, and they don't want us to know what it is. For this reason, as Genesis chapter 3 verse 24 tells us, God drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword, which turned every way to keep the way of the tree of life. There are brave heroes who try to bring us the secret of this fruit as a stolen treasure from the other side. But they are always sent to hell as a punishment, like Tantalus, like Prometheus, like Jesus. In the Hermetic order of the Golden Dawn, the second degree is that of Zelator, which the candidate is told is a term for a zealous, that is, daring or persevering student of alchemy. After being instructed to enter the pathway of evil, the neophyte is directed to a pair of pillars that he is told mark the entrance to the zone in the Garden of Eden, where the tree of life is protected by cherubs and a flaming sword. The person playing the part of the Hierophant explains it to them thusly. And Tetragrammaton, the Hebrew letters of the name IHVH, that is, Jehovah, placed cherubim at the east of the Garden of Eden, and a flaming sword which turned every way to keep the path of the tree of life, for he created nature, that man being cast out of Eden may not fall into the void. He has bound man with the stars, as with a chain. When the times are ended, he will call the cherubim from the east of the garden, and all shall be consumed and become infinite and holy. Note that the neophyte is told that he or she has the power to penetrate into the sanctity of a realm that God literally sealed off from our plane of existence, just to keep us out of it. Furthermore, at the end of that passage, the Hierophant talks about the total annihilation of creation through fire at the end of times. Then the neophyte is told that if they know the proper passwords, which he will have been given before the ritual, then he can enter the holy place. The imagery of Eden suddenly becomes replaced with that of the inner sanctum of the Israelites' tabernacle, wherein God was worshipped with the Ark of the Covenant. The Hierophant explains further. In this grade you pass through the gateway and come into the holy place. You are now in the court of the tabernacle, where stood the altar of burnt offering, whereon was offered the sacrifice of animals. Between the altar and the entrance into the holy place stood the laver of brass, wherein the priests washed before entering the tabernacle. It was the symbol of the waters of creation. Having made offering at the altar of burnt sacrifice, and having been cleansed at the laver of brass, the priest then entered the holy place. Again, just as the candidate is encouraged to imagine himself penetrating the forbidden realm of Eden, now he is being told to imagine himself going forth into that inaccessible chamber within the temple at Jerusalem, where only the priests were permitted. In the Old Testament, those who entered the inner sanctum of the temple that were unworthy were killed instantly by the Ark of the Covenant. But here, in this rite, you are told to just walk right in like you own the place. As we know, the inner sanctum of the tabernacle of the Israelites was a cube. In this Golden Dawn ritual, they tell you that behind that cube is another cube. Just as with the second square in a geo, this is where the real power resides. The Hierophant's speech continues. To the northern side of the holy place stood the table of shewbread. On it 12 loaves were laid as emblems of the bread of life, and it is an image of the mystery of the rose of creation. Before the veil of the Holy of Holies stood the altar of incense, of which this altar is an image. It was of the form of a double cube, thus representing the material form as a reflection and duplication of that which is spiritual. For were this double cube raised in the air immediately above your head, you would but see the single square forming the lowest side, the others from their position being concealed from you. Just so, behind the material universe, lies the concealed form of the mystery of God. The ritual then goes on to explain the Golden Dawn's Kabbalistic paradigm, which includes their schema of the Tree of Life, and below it the Tree of Knowledge, aka the Tree of Death, the Klippoth, or the Kingdom of Shells. In their graphic depiction of the Garden of Eden before the fall, based on an 1872 drawing by Elizabeth Burnett, wife of Golden Dawn founder Wynne Westcott, Eve, whom they also refer to as Isis, stands with her feet upon the spheres, the Sephiroth, of the Tree of Knowledge. The spheres are quite small, and all bound up into a tiny circle that sits beneath her. This circle is surrounded by the coils of a red dragon with 7 heads, all of which appear to be sleeping. Each head corresponds with one of the spheres, and just like on the Tree of Life above, these spheres correspond to aspects of existence, or in this case, negative, non-existence. 4 branches, or perhaps sprigs of young trees, are sprouting out from Malkuth, the lowest sphere on the Tree of Life, which sits behind Eve's ankles. Her hands are thrust upwards above her head to hold 2 pillars, one white and one dark, one in each hand. On top of her head, stacked on her as though in a cheerleading formation, is Adam. Coming forth from the 6 spheres that surround him are vines, which are winding their way up both of the pillars. Let us think about this Kabbalistic Tree of Life for a moment. It's not really a tree, is it? This is a schematic arrangement of chambers into which fluids flow from one to the other, with the quality of the fluids changing as they leave each chamber. It looks just like an image of an alchemist's laboratory, with various glass vessels hooked up to one another via tubes, because that's exactly what it is. In an alchemy lab, substances pass from one vessel to another, getting separated into elements, added to, heated, cooled, and otherwise transmuted along the way. That is also what is described as happening as the energy of creation moves through the various spheres on the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. Here on the Golden Dawn diagram of the tree before the fall, living things, such as tree sprouts and vines, are shown coming from the spheres. What this demonstrates is that the entire system is itself a garden, just as the Golden Dawn calls it in this diagram. It is a system of irrigation producing different fluids that water different plants to produce various fruits. Akkadian depictions of the Tree of Life. Above, diagram of the Garden of Eden before the fall, drawn by Elizabeth Burnett, wife of Dr. William Wynne Westcott, co-founder of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Lid of the pastas, from the Golden Dawn's Adeptus Minor ritual. Sophia pulling down the sun and moon from their heights with the Gnostic chains of the archons. From Joseph von Hammer Purgstall's Mysterium Baphometus Revelatum above, another image of the chains of the archons. Below, the Golden Dawn's Floor of the Vault of the Adepti, featuring the 7-headed dragon. Cain drinking Abel's blood after watching God take his brother's blood sacrifice, from Don Luis de Guzman's Biblia Alba, 15th century. Is this a case of monkey see, monkey do? If you'll take a second look at some of the ancient Mesopotamian depictions of the gods gathered around the Tree of Life, you will notice the same thing. It often looks like a fountain, with one main tube standing upright and several other connected tubes with bulbs on the end sticking out of it. It sometimes almost looks like a hookah, artfully arranged to resemble a tree. Around it, the gods are usually shown greedily waiting to feast upon it. This also appears to be what's going on with Enki in his Absu chamber. Recall that he is depicted with streams of water coming off his back, or possibly hoses, and streams of water flowing between a network of pipes, or alternately, again, those streams could actually be hoses. In one scene, he is apparently being approached by a priest who is offering him animal sacrifices, as he proffers to the priest the plant of immortality. It is budding forth from one of those posts connected to the network of hoses that issue from the pots set beneath his chair. Kabbalists do in fact describe their Tree of Life as a system of channels hooked up like irrigation pipes. They say that this is how the universe is arranged, with energy flowing down to us on earth, Malkuth, from the supernal realm of God on top, Kether, just as energy rises up from our realm towards God. They also say that, as man is a microcosm of the universe in the image of God, so there is a tree of life operating within his own physical body, channeling spiritual energy to and from the realms above, transmuting it alchemically along the way. In this sense, it links up to the Hindu system of chakras, energy spheres, in the body. Indeed, as has been widely noted, the Hindu scheme matches almost precisely with the middle pillar of the Tree of Life. As it turns out, the Kabbalistic spheres and the chakras land in the same basic positions along that central pole. This is something that is surely beyond coincidence. So if you imagine the chakra system as the middle pillar of the Tree of Life arranged along the human spinal column, then the sleeping apocalyptic dragon in the kingdom of shells at the bottom of the diagram is analogous to the so-called Kundalini serpent of yoga. This is a charge of powerful energy and potentia that reportedly rests at the bottom of the spine in the lowest chakra. They call this region Muladhara. It is the earth chakra, corresponding to Malkuth, the lowest sphere on the Tree of Life. There, the Kundalini serpent is said to be sleeping most of the time, but can be awakened through yoga practices. This causes it to rise up the spine through all of the other chakras. Finally, it reaches the top of the head, the Godhead zone, where it intermingles with divine energy from above. From there, it cycles back down the spine to return as a new alchemical mixture of polar opposite powers that enlivens the body as well as the soul. This serpent, then, most likely corresponds to the one in the Kabbalistic Qliphoth tree of knowledge before the fall, shown sleeping in a spherical cocoon that looks like an egg waiting to hatch. The Golden Dawn schematic of the Garden of Eden after the fall shows the results of that dragon being awakened. The beast is now much larger, and it has totally escaped the kingdom of shells, which the lower portion of Eve's body is now subsumed into. Its coils are enveloping the bottom half of the Tree of Life, including Eve, Adam, and 6 of the lower spheres. These now include an additional sphere, knowledge, called in Hebrew Dath, which purportedly sprang up during the fall. It now has 8 heads instead of 7, making it identical to the 8-headed Hydra dragon, famously slayed by Hercules. These heads are reaching up towards the supernal realm at the top, the source of the rivers of fluid that run down the tubes throughout the rest of the tree. According to the Golden Dawn system, these are the rivers of paradise. The rivers start out as one stream, called Neher, meaning perennial stream, which issues from the supernal Eden at the very top of the Tree of Life. It then divides into the 4 rivers, with only the 4th, the Euphrates, actually flowing into Malkuth, the earthly realm. Remember, 2 of these are the rivers that the Mesopotamians depicted as coming from Enki's back as he sat on his throne in the Absu. It is implied that, from our sphere, the other 3 rivers of paradise are invisible, as well as their perennial source. But it was also this extra sphere of Dath which caused the rivers to split off in the first place. As the Hierophant proclaims to the candidate in the Practicus ritual, a river Neher went forth out of Eden, namely from the supernal Triad, to water the garden, the rest of the Sephiroth, and from there it was divided into 4 heads in Dath, whence it is said, "In Dath the depths are broken up, and the clouds drop down dew." The 4th, which receiveth the virtues of the other 3, is Phrath, Euphrates, which floweth down upon the earth. These rivers, at least prior to becoming polluted by the dragon, are also referred to as a celestial river of the stars. They are imagined as forming a cross on the Tree of Life, which Adam is envisioned as being crucified upon as he stands on top of Eve's head. In the Golden Dawn's Practicus initiation rite, the symbolism of an image called the Calvary Cross of 12 squares is explained by the hegemon. He says that it fitly represents the zodiac which embraced the waters which be above the firmament. It also alludes to the eternal river of Eden, divided into 4 heads, which find their correlations in the 4 triplicities of the zodiac. Now the 11th sphere of Dath, which suddenly appeared on the Tree of Life after the fall, is always said to be false or illusionary. Its existence is said to be variously both the result of the fall and the cause of it. Dath is also said to be a portal to the Tree of Knowledge, the Tree of Death, below. This makes sense when you realize what the Golden Dawn tradition is saying about the fall of Eden. that the tree of life above collapsed when Eve stopped holding up the pillars for a moment. At that point, Eden and the tree from above fell down into the tree of knowledge, so that the realm above is now subsumed into the realm below, and even has a piece of the realm that was formerly below now inside of it. Death is an apple from the tree of knowledge that got stuck inside of the realm of life when Eve consumed it. It then became a gateway, allowing death into this life at its very heart, just as life is also surrounded with the ever-present threat of death. Clearly, the tree of knowledge is the same as the subterranean kingdom of Hades. But what would that have meant before the fall in Eden, when nobody had died yet? Its epithet, the kingdom of shells, implies not just empty vessels, but specifically ones that were once full, those which once housed living beings. They are described as shells because they once existed, but they have been wiped out from the memory of time, as though they never were. Yet the imprint of them still remains somehow. In the Golden Dawn, and Kabbalism in general, the kingdom of shells is personified by another historical kingdom that is mentioned in the Old Testament, Edom. Their kings descended from Esau, the eldest son of Isaac and the older brother of Jacob. He is said to have sold his birthright, which included the cave of treasures and the nearby well, to his younger brother in exchange for a bowl of pottage. He is described as a hunter, with a red tint to his skin, and covered with hair. Like Cain, he was a mighty hunter in the wilderness. Also like Cain, he has been demonized in Judeo-Christian tradition, which obfuscates the fact that he should have been the rightful heir to his father Isaac's blessing. Jacob used subterfuge to trick his father, who was lying on his deathbed, into passing the birthright onto him instead. He also tricked Esau into tacitly selling it to him in a moment of desperation. Perhaps most significantly, there are several women that the sons of Esau married and bred with who are recorded in rabbinical literature as actually being incarnations of Lilith. They were not natural women, but she-demons. Their sons, the Edomite rulers, who are described variously as dukes and kings, are said in the Bible to have ruled before there reigned any king over the children of Israel. Genesis chapter 36, verse 31. Later, the Edomites got into a series of wars with Israel. They were defeated, first by King Saul and then later by King David also. David appointed Israelite governors to rule them. When Israel eventually split into two kingdoms, Israel and Judah, Edom became a protectorate of Judah. Later still, the Edomites were among those who plundered Jerusalem when it was sacked by King Nebuchadnezzar II. So this is who the Edomites were, according to the pseudo-history of the Bible and the legends of the rabbis. In the Kabbalah and Western Hermeticism, they seem to symbolize the reign of chaos before God's creation established order in the universe. That would explain why they are equated with the sons of the older brother Esau, who, by the right of primogeniture, should have inherited his family's birthright. However, it was his older brother, a son of creation, not chaos, who ultimately took that position, prevailing as the children of Israel conquered the Edomites, the children of before, as they are called by Kabbalists. In the Golden Dawn's Practicus ritual, the Hierophant explains Edom as a personification of primordial chaos, and the order of creation as the coming of Israel. He says, "Ere the Eternal instituted the formation, beginning and end existed not. Therefore before him he expanded a certain veil, and therein he instituted the primal kings." And these are the kings who reigned in Edom before there reigned a king over Israel. "But they subsisted not. When the earth was formless and void, behold, this is the reign of Edom. And when the creation was established, La, this is the reign of Israel." In the wars of titanic forces in the chaos of creation, La, these are the wars between them. From a light bearer of unsupportable brightness proceeded a radiating flame, hurling forth, like a cast and mighty hammer, those sparks which were the primal worlds. And these sparks flamed and scintillated a while, but being unbalanced, they were extinguished. Since the kings assembled, they passed away together. They themselves beheld, so they were astonished. They feared, they hasted away. And these be the kings of Edom, who reigned before there reigned a king over Israel. As the ritual goes on, more detail is given about the war with the Edomites, a war that is depicted as really being between the dragon and God himself. It is the dragon whose heads and horns are the Edomite kings and dukes. This war with the Edomites was, in Judaic history, recorded as an ongoing military feud that lasted generations. However, in this ritual it is Conference 1 aided with the primordial war in heaven between God and the devil, as well as the fall of Adam and Eve from Eden. This was really, they say, the fall of Eden itself, away from the garden and into the mouths of the dragon. They also connect it to the flood, as well as, implicitly, the final battle with the dragon at the apocalypse. Describing God's defeat of the Edomites, the Hierophant says, "He beheld and drove asunder the nations, and the everlasting mountains were scattered, and perpetual hills did bow. Thou didst cleave asunder the earth with the rivers. The mountains saw thee, and they trembled. The deluge of waters rolled by." In Kundalini Yoga, you push the dragon energy up into the Godhead realm, resulting in an allegedly beneficial exchange of both earthly and divine energy. In the Kabbalah, the rise of the serpent up the tree from the depths below caused the rivers of paradise to be polluted. As it says in the Golden Dawn's Fifth Knowledge Lecture, "Thus were the 4 rivers of Eden desecrated, and the dragon mouth gave forth the infernal waters in Daath, and this is Leviathan, the piercing and crooked serpent. Therefore God sealed off the source of the pure waters above, so that it would not also be polluted. As the Golden Dawn Rite teaches it, God placed the 4 letters YHVH of the name and the flaming sword of the 10 Sephiroth between the devastated garden and the supernal Eden, that this should not be involved in the fall of Adam." Note that here the Golden Dawn equates the 4 cherubim on the throne with the cherubs that Genesis says God set in place to guard the tree of life in Eden, as well as with the 4 letters of the holy name. Via the iconotropy mentioned previously, they would also, presumably, equate the 4 letters and cherubim with the cherubs that were said to flank the Ark of the Covenant. The Golden Dawn views that Ark as a tiny microcosmic version of Eden's supernal, as they allude to elsewhere in their rituals. According to their system, when Eden fell into the coils of the dragon, Malkuth, the kingdom that is the earth, got cut off from the spheres from the river of life by those coils. As the Hierophant says in the Practicus ritual, "Then arose the great dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and the garden was made desolate, and Malkuth was cut off from the Sephiroth by his intersecting folds, and linked unto the kingdom of shells. And the 7 lower Sephiroth were cut off from the 3 supernals in Daath. This was all Eve's fault, purportedly, because she failed in her duty to uphold the pillars of the universe. Instead, she stooped down to pick up some fruit from the tree beneath her, causing the realm above and the realm below to collapse into each other." In the same ritual, while explaining the diagram of the Garden of Eden after the fall, the Hierophant declares, "The great goddess who was supporting the columns of the Sephiroth, being tempted by the tree of knowledge, whose branches indeed tend upward into the 7 lower Sephiroth, but also tend downward unto the kingdom of shells, reached downward unto the Klipoth, and immediately the columns were unsupported, and the Sephirothic system was shattered, and with it fell Adam, the Microprosopus. But at another point in that rite, after invoking the name of God as the Lord of armies, the Hierophant discusses the meaning of the tarot card depicting the tower. Here he paints a picture of God using the flaming sword to destroy some columns as well. The card represents a tower struck by a lightning flash proceeding from a rayed circle and terminating in a triangle. It is the Tower of Babel struck by the fire from heaven. It is to be noted that the triangle and the end of the flash, issuing from the circle, forms exactly the astronomical symbol of Mars. It is the power of the triad rushing down and destroying the columns of darkness. 3 holes are rent in the walls, symbolizing the establishment of the triad therein, and the crown at the summit of the tower is falling, as the crowns of the kings of Edom fell. The reference to the symbol of Mars is meant to emphasize the fact that this event was part of a war, as was an earlier reference made in the ritual to God as Yod-He Vavi Hetzabaoth. Mighty and terrible, commander of the ethereal armies. This goes along with what Cain has said to us during the seances. Remember how he told us that the fall of Eden is the same as the fall of Atlantis and the deluge of Noah? He said that it resulted from a war between Nod, chaos Edom with his brother for control of Eden. He said that this was the same event as the war in heaven. He spoke about the 10 Molochs, or fallen kings of Dohir, aka the fallen land. He said that Eden itself fell into the watery abyss as a result of the war. Referring to how these events are depicted in the game of Agio, he too utilized the image of the tower. He said, "Castles fall." For the Golden Dawn to connect the Tower tarot card with the Tower of Babel, as well as with the fall of Eden and the war with Edom, means they are saying that it was specifically the Lord's flaming sword that came down to destroy Babel's tower. It is depicted on the tarot card as a bolt of lightning. Just as in the Kabbalah, the sword is shown as a jagged lightning bolt zigzagging its way through the paths down the Tree of Life. It means that this too is another story from the war over Eden. Those who built the tower were trying to penetrate that supernal realm in Eden, where the Tree of Life is. They were thwarted by the flaming sword. Furthermore, the Golden Dawn's deliberate conflation of events goes along with the way in which Baphomet talked about the Garden of Eden, the war in heaven, and the apocalypse as all being the same event occurring simultaneously now. Another image used in the Golden Dawn's Adeptus Minor ritual shows Jesus on the cross being enveloped from below by the now 8-headed dragon, just as Adam and Eve are shown on the Garden of Eden after the fall graphic. Above that picture is placed a depiction of the flaming sword coming down from the supernal Eden. This demonstrates the Golden Dawn's view that the crucifixion was also part of this eternal moment. Again, when discussing the Garden of Eden after the fall during the Practicus ritual, the Hierophant says, "And thence it was necessary that the second Adam should come to restore all things, and that, as the first Adam had been extended on the cross of the celestial rivers, so the Son should be crucified on the cross of the infernal rivers of Daath." In the Golden Dawn's 4th knowledge lecture, author Frater SMRD again talks about Adam on a cross made from the rivers of paradise, adding that these are also the rivers of the New Jerusalem in the Apocalypse. The river going out of Eden is the river of the Apocalypse, the waters of life, clear as crystal proceeding from the throne on either side of the Tree of Life. Thus the rivers form a cross, and on it the great Adam, the Son who is to rule the nations. Note here that Adam is now equated with Jesus, reigning forevermore with the Father as the King of Kings in the New Jerusalem. The symbol of Jesus on the cross is compared in the New Testament to that of the Nehushtan, a brass serpent figure mounted on a pole that healed the Israelites when they were stricken by fiery serpents during their sojourns in the wilderness. But it is also connected in Christian theology and iconography to the Tree of Life in the Garden of Eden. In alchemy, this concept is referenced with the symbol of a serpent being crucified. This is quite clearly because Jesus said that his body and blood were the fruits of this tree, and that consuming them would bring eternal life to mortals. He also said that by shedding his blood on the cross, the Tree of Life, he was paying the price for the original sin that resulted from Adam eating from the Tree of Knowledge. At that moment, the dragon was defeated. Thus, the events that play themselves out in St. John's Revelation have, from the viewpoint of the eternal, supernal Eden, already happened. This is why Baphomet said the apocalypse and the fall in the garden were both happening now, and really soon. This is why Cain said that in the game of Agio it was important from his perspective, that of the Black Kingdom, the losers, to accept defeat. According to the Golden Dawn, the first of the 4 tributaries to issue forth from Neher, the perennial stream of paradise, is Pison. In their 4th knowledge lecture, Pison is described as a river of fire pooling up into the sphere called Geburah, judgment. Whether this is related to the alchemical annihilation of sinners in the lake of fire at the final judgment is unknown. However, I do think at this point we can assume that the golden nature of the stream relates to the fact that the water of life which comes from the gods is golden and sparkling clear like ichor, god blood. This is in contrast to the water of life that living things on earth bring forth, which is red. I also think that at least one of these rivers is the flaming sword itself. It seals off the supernal realm of Eden from the rest of the universe, polluted by the chaos of the dragon. This is the same as the chasm described by the Jews as a river between the bosom of Abraham and the rest of the underworld of Sheol. It may also be what is represented on the board of the Chinese game of Shanqi, where there is a heavenly river that certain pieces cannot cross, and which transforms others into more powerful pieces when they do cross. Recalling that the Golden Dawn connects the four rivers of paradise to the cross and the zodiac, it may be important that the word Jiangqi might mean constellation game, according to some writers. Also, the movement of the pieces may have been based on the apparent movement of objects in the sky. Alchemy teaches that there is a process to create a knife that can cut through time and space. This is the universal solvent, what Fulcanelli called le bon saber, the good sword. Like Arthur's Excalibur, only the predestined owner of this sword can release it from the stone. This, he says, is what Michael used to spear the dragon, and connected to the image of the crucified serpent. The same can be said of the nearly identical icon of St. George, the patron of England, slaying a dragon in the style of the aforementioned archangel. England is home to Glastonbury, literally Glasstone Hill. This place is not only associated with King Arthur and the Holy Grail, but is also said to have at one time hosted Jesus himself, along with Joseph of Arimathea. In his poetry, William Blake portrayed England as the landing site of the New Jerusalem at the Apocalypse. In The Faerie Queene, Sir Edmund Spenser dealt with all of these themes. The hero, the Red Cross Knight, battles a dragon that had attacked and destroyed the Kingdom of Eden, including the castle of its king and queen. He does this at the behest of the castle's princess, who is distraught over what has happened to her parents. After successfully conquering the beast, he is dubbed St. George and shown a vision of the New Jerusalem. However, this flaming sword which pierced the dragon and which sealed off the fruit of life from mortal hands is what gave birth to the demons Samael and Lilith. In Zohar 1:19b, it says of Lilith, "She approached the gates of paradise on earth and saw the cherubim guarding the gates of paradise, and sat down facing the flaming sword, for she originated from that flame. When that flame revolved, she fled." Recall that God is said to have already pierced at least one of those two dragons, Behemoth and Leviathan, and separated them from each other to prevent the world from being annihilated. The same is told about Lilith and her partner Samael, who seem to be the same entities as Behemoth and Leviathan. So that means that Lilith became what she is, an individual apart from her partner because of that flaming sword. This event was probably itself part of the process of sealing off Eden to protect all of creation from total destruction. In fact, there may be reason to believe that Lilith herself is one of those cherubim. Genesis merely says that God placed cherubims on the east of the Garden of Eden. It does not say how many there were. However, this image tends to get combined with that of the four creatures that are said to guard the throne or chariot of God. They take the form of a man, a lion, an eagle, and an ox. They are called the living creatures. The Hebrew word for chariot comes from chai, which means to live. However, they are also referred to as cherubim. The chariot and the creatures show up whenever God makes a physical appearance somewhere, and it appears to function like a vehicle. Because the Ark of the Covenant was also guarded by cherubim, and because the Ark acted as a throne on which God's presence would sit when he appeared inside of the temple, there does appear to be an implicit connection between those cherubs and the ones guarding the chariot. Also, since the inner sanctum of the temple, with the ark inside, seems to be a replica of the supernal Eden, and the rituals which took place inside appear designed to supernaturally teleport the priests to Eden, a connection with the cherubim guarding Eden is also implied. But the ark is usually shown with two cherubs flanking it, whereas God's throne always has the four creatures. Eden has been variously depicted in visual artwork as having either two cherubs guarding a gate, identical in appearance to the way the two are always shown on the ark, or the four creatures of God's chariot, each stationed at one of the four compass points. In the Golden Dawn's Theoricus ritual, the Hierophant interprets the 21st tarot card, the World, and the woman it features, surrounded by the four beastly cherubim of God's chariot and throne. Intriguingly, he describes her not only as both Isis and a character in the Apocalypse, but also, of the cherubs guarding the Ark of the Covenant, he states, "Her legs form a cross. She is the bride of Apocalypse, the Kabbalistic queen of the Canticles, the Egyptian Isis, or great feminine cherubic angel Sandalphon, on the left hand of the mercy seat of the Ark. Indeed, there is a Kabbalistic tradition that the Ark Guardians are the angels Metatron and Sandalphon. Here the Golden Dawn is saying that it was a male and female pair. In his book Dark Mirrors, Azazel and Sataniel in Early Jewish Demonology, Andrei A. Orlov presents evidence that the cherubim of the Ark were a male and female entwined in sexual union. He quotes the Yoma treatise from the Babylonian Talmud. Whenever Israel came up to the festival, the curtain would be removed for them, and the cherubim were shown to them, whose bodies were intertwisted with one another, and they would be thus addressed. Look, you are beloved before God, as the love between man and woman. Then elsewhere in the same text we read the following. When the heathens entered the temple and saw the cherubim whose bodies were intertwisted with one another, they carried them out and said, These Israelites, whose blessing is a blessing and whose curse is a curse, occupy themselves with such things. And immediately they despised them, as it is said, All that honored her despised her, because they have seen her nakedness. As for the confusion about the cherubim guarding God's throne, and whether or not they are the same ones guarding the tree of life in Eden, Orlov does make some very interesting connections. He provides several quotations stating that God's presence would rest on a cherub on the tree of life, just as he would sit upon the cherubs on top of the Ark of the Covenant, and just as in the New Jerusalem he's seen on his chariot throne surrounded by cherubs. In the life of Adam and Eve, it says, As God entered the garden, the plants of Adam's portion flowered, but all mine were bereft of flowers. And the throne of God was fixed where the tree of life was. Then in 2 Enoch 8, 3-4 we are told, And in the midst of them was the tree of life, at that place where the Lord takes a rest when he goes into paradise. Finally, in 3 Enoch 5-1, we learn that this has not always been the case, but rather God's throne has been there since the fall. It says, From the day that the Holy One, blessed be he, banished the first man from the Garden of Eden, the Shekinah resided on a cherub beneath the tree of life. Even more intriguingly, Orlov discusses a tradition that squarely backs up the Golden Dawn teaching of the two trees that were originally stacked on top of one another, and which are now separated from each other with the flaming sword. Zohar 1:237 says that the tree of knowledge was driven out of paradise along with Adam and Eve. Not only that, but also, apparently, there are cherubim now beneath the trees, both above and below. Could this explain the tradition that there are 4 cherubim total? Are there 2 for the tree of life in the supernal Eden, which is represented on earth and supernaturally accessed by the priests from the inner sanctum of the temple via the Ark of the Covenant? Then perhaps there are 2 also flanking the tree of knowledge. Maybe Lilith and Samael are themselves the guardians of that cursed tree. It could be that this is a form of forced servitude and part of their punishment, just as Rosenkreutz was cursed to guard the tomb of Venus. Also, maybe the tree of knowledge can be viewed as sitting directly outside of Eden, and thus maybe it is these 4 cherubs together, 2 inside the gates of Eden and 2 without, that form the quaternity which surrounds God's throne. Perhaps, unlike the cherubs that the Shekinah rests upon in Eden and the 2 on top of the ark, these 2 are not locked in sexual union, manifesting a divine presence in their bliss. Rather, these 2 have been divided in such a way that true union can never take place. Thus, their ability to activate a presence, as God does, has been hampered, thereby saving the universe from destruction. This may be why Lilith sits lamenting at the gates of Eden. Recall that, as I explained previously, in the Golden Dawn's diagram of the Garden of Eden before the fall, the spheres around Adam on the tree of life have vines coming out of them, which are wrapped around the pillars that Eve is holding. In Dark Mirrors, Andrei A. Orlov explores pseudepigraphal writings stating the grape was the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge, or rather, from a vine wrapped around that tree. This is interesting for many reasons. For one thing, a vine is actually a parasite that feeds off of other plants, like trees, and coils itself around its host like a snake. Clearly, there are parallels here with the concept of the serpent on the tree. We get the idea that the serpent may have possessed one or both of the human protoplasts to encourage them to eat from the tree and have carnal knowledge with each other. Orlov talks about a passage in the Apocalypse of Abraham where a picture is painted of Adam and Eve standing under the tree of knowledge, entwined with each other physically, and with the fallen angel, Azazel, between them. In the midst of this, a bunch of what appear to be grapes hang from the tree. Orlov likens this to a ménage à trois and suggests that it may be an allusion to the first couple being ridden via demonic possession. As I have said, I think that this is, in fact, what is meant when it is said that Lilith and Samael cannot have sexual union without the Taninver as an intermediary. Remember, some rabbinical traditions say that Azazel is the name for the combination of Lilith and Samael. Now, symbolically, grapes imply blood, and vines imply bloodlines being bred over generations. The Bible certainly mentions the grapevine being preserved as a species in the new world that Noah and his family emerged into. Genesis says that Noah made wine from the grapes and got drunk from it, which is why Jews credited Noah, like Dionysus was among the Greeks, as the inventor of alcoholic beverages. He ended up naked in his tent, where his children scandalously found him, echoing the realization of their own nakedness that Adam and Eve had after eating from the tree of knowledge. But in the scriptures cited by Orlov, there is much more to the story of the grape. In the Slavonic version of the book 3 Baruch, it talks about angels being assigned by God to plant trees in the Garden of Eden. The angels were Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, Raphael, and Sataniel, and they each planted a tree. The first four planted good trees, but Sataniel planted the vine. This is undoubtedly a reference to the rebellious angels who injected their own seed into human females. Orlov cites certain texts and commentary on those texts that make it seem like the Garden of Eden was almost as a prison, complete with bailiffs, where humans were kept and bred like livestock by angelic gardeners. 4Q530 refers to the gardeners watering numerous roots issued from their trunk. Who are these gardeners? Joseph Milik was first to identify the gardeners as angelic beings. He argued that the gardeners are guardian angels or bailiffs of the world garden. Lauren Stuckenbrook suggests that in light of 4Q530 line 8, the ultimate outcome of the gardeners' work seems to be the production of great shoots from the root source, which, in Stuckenbrook's opinion, signifies the birth of the giants from the women. He further argues that the watering activity is a metaphor for impregnation, and the gardeners, in fact, represent fallen angelic beings, the watchers. The intentions of the angels towards the humans that they bred with may not have been based on erotic love. Rather, it could have been a mass rape intended to humiliate the race of Adam, whom they jealously despised. Orlov says that in 3 Baruch, Sataniel sets out purposely to plant a tree designed to cause the fall and degradation of the human race. Then in the Midrash of Shemhazai and Azazel, according to Orlov, the evil desire of the watchers over humans seems to come as consequence of the watchers, disrespect for humanity in general and the first human creature in particular. In order to wipe out this accursed bloodline, God caused everything, including the garden itself, to be destroyed in the deluge. But according to 3 Baruch, the bloodline planted by the fallen angels survived. It was washed out of the garden as the waters receded and ended up at the feet of Noah as he disembarked the ark. Lines 410b11 state, "And the water entered into the garden and took all that was blooming, bringing out one shoot from the vine as God withdrew the waters. And there was dry land, and Noah went out from the ark." When Noah discovered that the vine had escaped, he did now know what to do. He did not want to plant it because it would produce the fruit that caused the fall of Adam and Eve. But God sent an angel named Sarasiel to tell Noah, "Rise, Noah, and plant the vine and alter its name and change it for the better." More evidence that the vine, and in fact all of the trees of the garden, represent bloodlines can be found in the Midrash of Shemhazai and Azazel, where it talks about prophetic dreams had by two giants, sons of the soon-to-be-fallen angel Shemhazai. It involves a stone hovering over the earth, followed by genocidal gardening. One night, the sons of Shemhazai, Hiwa and Hiya, saw dreams. One saw the great stone spread over the earth. The other, son, saw a garden, planted whole with many kinds of trees and many kinds of precious stones. And an angel was seen by him, descending from the firmament with an axe in his hand, and he was cutting down all the trees, so that there remained only one tree containing 3 branches. When they awoke from their sleep, they arose in confusion, And, going to their father, they related to him the dreams. He said to them, "The Holy One is about to bring a flood upon the world, and to destroy it, so that there will remain but one man and his 3 sons." In 3 Baruch, the placement of the passages about the survival of the vine, right next to verses about the survival of Noah's line, implies that the former is a metaphor for the latter. This seems to be a method that is often used in Scripture to draw parallels between things and explain symbolism. There are also references in the book of Enoch to Noah being a, quote, plant of righteousness and truth. In the Syncelus translation of the book of Enoch, God tells the angel Sariel to tell Noah, "And now instruct the righteous one what to do, and the son of Lamech, that he may save his life and escape for all time, and from him a plant shall be planted and established for all generations forever." Recall that, in the Mesopotamian versions of the flood story, the pilot of the ark was rewarded with the plant of immortality. However, in most versions of the Judeo-Christian tales, it was Noah's grandfather Enoch who was made immortal, as he was also given the first warning about the impending disaster of the deluge. But here we have an angel being told by God that Noah will save his life and escape for all time. Did that mean that he escaped death itself, forever, like his great-grandfather? Or it is possible that, just as L.A. Waddell has suggested, Noah and Enoch are in fact based on the same historical figure. What about my theory that perhaps Cain and Seth are the same person, and that Cain's name was changed to obfuscate the fact that he and his descendants survived the flood? After all, Sariel is instructed to tell Noah to plant the vine and alter its name and change it for the better. Could this be a reference to the line of Cain surviving in altered form? Is it possible, as the stories Cain told us in the seances seem to imply, that Cain's son Enoch and Seth's descendant Enoch were really the same? Could it be that Cain's son Enoch, whom Cain indicated is identical with the city of the same name, is also the figure who was translated to heaven to be God's personal assistant? Also, is Noah merely a mythological, iconotropic extension of the personage of Enoch? Think about it. Enoch is said to be the first scribe and the author of the first books, which told the story of the universe from the creation through the deluge, experienced by his alleged great-grandson Noah. As the author of his own story, working, of course, under the tutelage of God, isn't it his prerogative to tell the story the way he chooses, or perhaps the way God tells him to? According to the Book of Jubilees, Enoch was translated not just to heaven, but specifically to the supernal Eden, where the tree of life is. There he was apparently placed as a sort of guardian, like the cherubim in the flaming sword were. Somehow, the text says, his written testimony of the story of creation acted to protect Eden from the flood. In Jubilees 4:23 we read, "The floodwater did not come on any of the land of Eden, because he was placed there as a sign, and to testify against all people, in order to tell all the deeds of history until the day of judgment." Perhaps Enoch's written history acts to solidify the reality of the story, to keep it from dissolving into chaos like the waters of the flood. Solidifying reality appears to be one of the roles that mankind has been charged with. Remember what it said in the Golden Dawn Zelator ritual, when it describes the placement of the cherubim and the flaming sword on the east of Eden. "For he created nature, that man being cast out of Eden may not fall into the void. He has bound man with the stars, as with a chain. When the times are ended, he will call the cherubim from the east of the garden, and all shall be consumed and become infinite and holy." What it seems to be saying is that God placed the sword and the cherubim there, which, as we know, separated Behemoth/Samael and Leviathan/Lilith, to prevent the universe from being annihilated. At the end of times, these barriers will be removed so that this destruction can proceed, except for, presumably, for the segment of the universe called the New Jerusalem. Somehow, part of maintaining this necessary separation involves binding mankind with celestial chains. What is the meaning of this? We're used to seeing images of demons bound in chains, as well as the damned in hell. But are we, the living, also bound? In Joseph of Ammerpurgstall's Mysterium Baphometus, he reproduces an Ophite Gnostic image that he says influenced the Templars. representation of Baphomet. It involves a hermaphroditic figure wearing a crown, dragging the sun, moon, and stars down from their heights by chains that suspend from them. These are the chains of the archons that the Gnostics talked about. They keep the planets and stars bound to their orbits, as they keep us tied to our fates. I think that this, somehow, is part of the process of keeping heaven and hell separated. This realm that we are now in was created, and mankind was cast out of Eden into here, in order to provide that buffer zone. This is why the Golden Dawn portrays Adam and Eve, particularly the latter, as being responsible for holding up the pillars of the tree of life. This is why they tell the would-be Theoricus to imagine himself in the position of Atlas, holding up the heavens on his head and shoulders. Notice the frequency with which people and demigods are described in these myths and traditions as having to stand perpetually in unendurable stress positions, a la Abu Ghraib-style torture. Tantalus not only has the fruit dangling out of reach of his mouth, but is also positioned standing with one foot on land and another dangling over water, always trying to stand on a little boat that is constantly slipping out from beneath him. Atlas also is clearly in pain. As for Adam and Eve, as they are shown in the Golden Dawn diagrams of Eden, they certainly don't look comfortable. Eve is holding up the weight of the pillars with the palms of her hands hoisted above her head in a way that looks impossible. As for Adam, his arms are outstretched, and his feet are contorted together strangely in a pose that the Golden Dawn's ritual describes as, quote, crucifixion. Then, of course, consider the real crucifixion of Christ, or Judas if you believe that story. The real pain came not from the nails themselves, but from the way that the weight of his body had to hang from his arm and chest muscles. Is this, again, the sort of thing that Cain was talking about when he described to us the torture he is enduring in hell as Gitmo? For more perspective on what this might be about, let us examine the claims of paranormal researcher Peggy Cain. Anyone who has seen an episode of a modern ghost hunting reality show knows that EVPs are messages that can be heard on either a digital or analog audio recording. People will record themselves talking to disembodied spirits and then play the recording back to hear the spirits reply, usually whispered and faint, as well as distorted sounding. Peggy Cain began practicing this technique many years ago after a long career as a UFO expert. She used it as a way to contact extraterrestrial intelligences that allegedly resided in parallel dimensions. But then she decided to go a step forward. She applied a technique known reverse speech analysis, perfected by David John Oates. Allegedly, if you reverse a recording of someone talking, it will say something else that will reveal what the person was really thinking as he or she was speaking. The way it is supposed to work is simple. If the backwards message is, quote, with the forwards message, it allegedly means that the speaker was being honest at the time. However, frequently the perceived backwards message is something at variance with the initial message. This, practitioners believe, means that analysis of the reversal will reveal the truth that the speaker is trying to hide. When Peggy Cain applied this technique to the EVPs she was recording, it painted a picture of reality that was totally different from what we perceive normally. It was a much more sinister view of our world, as well as the world beyond and what happens to us when we die. UFO expert Linda Moulton Howell once asked, "Could it be that death is the ultimate UFO abduction experience?" That is the conclusion that Peggy Cain has come to, and the intentions of our abductors are not nice at all, according to her. Ms. Cain says that our reality is being controlled from outside forces that do not have our best interests in mind. They are using both our bodies and souls for food, amusement, and scientific experimentation. Their world is what we consider to be the astral realm from our perspective over here. But when we leave our bodies to travel over there, which she says we do frequently, then it is perceived as a physical world, just like our own. There are buildings, streets, factories, stores, and money being exchanged over there, just like there is here. But the universe on the other side is ruled by a bloodthirsty race of reptilians. They walk upright like humans. However, that is where the similarity ends. According to Cain, the reptilians keep humans in a three-dimensional prison by the use of some sort of artificial force field called the net. The situation is very similar to the plot of the film The Matrix, in which human slaves were kept by their robot overlords comatose in little capsules floating in goo. In the film, the captive humans were used as batteries and bled of their energy while they lived their lives in a computer-generated dream world. Ms. Kane says that this is kind of what's really happening. She claims that we are constantly being drained of our energy by our hidden masters. Though we are unaware of it, they are constantly sucking our soul essence, both through the emotional vibrations we emit and also via our blood and other body fluids. The soul essence is called loosh, allegedly, and pre-adolescent children are the best source. In order to feed from us, Ms. Kane says that the reptilians sometimes possess our bodies, the way we think of demon possession. This is called being seeded. They open portals or mind gates into the human psyche that allow them to whisper suggestions to us, which we hear subconsciously. This, she says, results in altering the possessed person's behavior according to the parasite's wishes. This can then create whatever emotional response the parasite wishes to feed from. According to Kane, if a reptilian inside you really enjoys the emotions you give off when you are fighting with your boyfriend, then he will whisper suggestions to you which instigate these situations. Kane claims that they also make direct use of our astral bodies on the other side. As soon as people die and their spirit travels to the other side, they are swallowed, just like the worst sinners are depicted being eaten by the devil in Dante's Inferno. She says that this is taking place even on supposedly dead planets in our own solar system. Ms. Kane purports that Mars is a central hub for the trafficking of astral body parts. However, that is perhaps not the worst of it. According to Kane, the reptilians make use of us sexually as well. Reptilians pull people out of their bodies at night and rape them, she says. They do it to almost everybody, both male and female. The purpose of this, she believes, is that it is another way of stealing our energy. Rape is one of the ways they feed, says Peggy. They call that alien honey. Ms. Kane says that many of the reptilians delight in toying with psychics and channelers who attempt to contact the spiritual dimension. They play the roles of gods, guardian angels, familiar spirits, departed relatives, and whatever else the seeking person wishes to see. They set up situations where the people they contact agree to give them even more loosh, including blood sacrifices, opportunities to possess human bodies, and sexual favors. Without passing judgment on the veracity of Kane's claims, methods, or referential paradigm, I will say that nothing I have experienced or found in my research really disproves the picture she portrays of reality. A lot of what she has to say rings true, according to my own experience of talking to spirits on the other side, as well as my decades of research into comparative mythology and occult traditions. If what Ms. Kane says is accurate, then so too is that statement made by Mephistopheles to Dr. Faustus, "Why, this is hell, nor am I out of it." Just think about the story of Prometheus having his liver eaten every day by an eagle, a symbol of Zeus, only to have it grow back the next day. If this is what they would do to one of their own, another immortal, imagine what they do to us. Certainly it does seem as if there are invisible entities running the show that have historically demanded blood sacrifice, from whence they feed on the blood, as well as spiritual energy given in the form of religious rituals, prayers, and meditation. The events which led up to the unfortunate fate of Prometheus are worth mentioning, for they pertain to the subject of sacrifice. The whole matter began with something called the trick at Mykone, where the precedent for the Greek custom of sacrifice was established. At a meeting between gods and men at a mysterious place called Mykone, Prometheus invited Zeus to choose which portion of the animals killed for meat on earth would be offered to him in sacrifice. What Prometheus had done was killed an ox and created two portions out of the remains. One was the stomach of the ox, stuffed with all of the meat. The other portion was a pile of bones wrapped in glistening fat. Zeus purportedly had not seen Prometheus arrange the portions and chose the one that looked good on the outside, the bones. Mankind, then, would get to eat the meat from each kill. Apparently unable to alter the decision once it had been made, Zeus became angry and punished mankind by removing fire from Earth. Now people could not cook the meat that Prometheus had won for them, nor could they keep themselves warm at night. Prometheus felt sorry for people and stole fire from Olympus to bring it back to humanity. Then Zeus, in retribution for this, chained Prometheus to the Caucasus Mountains and sent the eagle after him to peck his liver. Ancient Greek poets and chroniclers repeatedly wrote that the gods starved and began to die, or fade from existence, whenever belief in religion would wane with the populace. These people clearly suspected that the immortals secretly relied on the efforts of mortals to survive. Similarly, the Mesopotamians described their gods as starving on their holy mountaintop retreat while humanity was drowning in the deluge. Is this because there was nobody to feed them, both with bloody sacrifices and with the energy of reverent belief? When Utnapishtim cooked the gods a burnt offering after leaving his ark, they ravenously descended upon it, as God did in the version in Genesis. Let us contemplate again the images of Enki in the Absu. Priests present the god with sacrifices. Then perhaps he is taking the energy from that, running it through a divine alchemical process, maybe within his own body, and or those of others, the vessels shown in the images beneath and surrounding Enki's throne. He then returns the energy to the priests in the form of the plant of immortality. In the temple in Jerusalem, blood was being poured on the altar. The power of that went towards God, whose presence was inside of the ark. When the presence came, it could be seen hovering over the lid of the ark, seated right between the two cherubim on the top that formed the mercy seat. Perhaps it was the power derived from this blood that was transmuted inside of that mysterious vessel. The output of this was then manifested on top of the ark in the form of the presence. This presence then infused the shewbread, which was eaten by the priests. Then there is the hidden manna that Jesus promised to give the saved in the New Jerusalem. Is this related to the feast of the meat of Leviathan that Jews believe the pious will eat at the end times? Is this another type of divine alchemical process? Leviathan can be thought of as the serpent of chaos who encircles creation, thus holding everything within its body, so to speak, and which eats the souls of the dead, like the giant maw that the gates of hell are frequently depicted as being. In that sense, she had the oldest and largest stomach in the universe, being the ultimate landing place of every soul that dies. So is it that this beast, having consumed all of this soul essence and gained from it vast energy, is then butchered and served to the chosen few, who get to benefit from ingesting all of that essence into themselves? Is this what brings them immortality, as the symbol of the Ouroboros, an encircled serpent eating its own tail, represents? Is this also the meaning of that other alchemical symbol of eternal life, showing two dragons that form a circle by eating each other's tails? I think it is true that we are somehow the source of food for the gods, as well as the beasts of burden who hold up the pillars of the universe. We are the slaves who till the soil for them, so to speak. At the end, our souls are harvested by the grim reaper, who is Saturn with his scythe, cutting down and eating his own children. But it is a symbiotic relationship. Our existence certainly depends on the other side as well. If man is made in God's image, it seems to me that part of our role is to act as his eyes and his imagination, collapsing the trajectories of probability curves as we observe and thus define the reality around us. In other words, I think we are integral to the process of creation, and that is the crushing responsibility that we must bear. That is one way in which we hold aloft the heavens on our shoulders. That is why symbols like cornerstones, keystones, and foundation stones apply with the matters that we are discussing here. Keystones hold arches together with pillars. That is the role that Adam and Eve are shown playing in the Golden Dawn's diagram of Eden before the fall. Cornerstones and other foundation stones obviously go on the bottom of edifices and bear the weight of the entire structure. This is the role formerly played by the realm of the Culipoth shown beneath Eve's feet in that schematic. The underworld is the foundation for Earth and everything above it. Therefore, while mankind is shown playing a brutally difficult role in holding the universe together, the weight of it all is ultimately placed upon the world below, just as the weight of the blame for the sin of the world is cast there as well. For Buddhists, the deepest chamber in hell, reserved for those who have committed unpardonable sins, is called Avicii, and it is said to be cube-shaped. Throughout history, the greatest sins in society are usually not murder, rape, or theft, but blasphemy and heresy. In religions, these are generally considered unpardonable and worthy of execution as punishment. Nobody is allowed to talk about what the matrix might look like from the outside, and you are greatly discouraged from thinking about it. According to the traditions of the Golden Dawn, a glimpse of the truth was had during God's war with Edom. Then the channels of the waters were seen, and the foundations of the world were discovered. In other words, to see how the world really works is itself a world-shattering experience. If everybody had such an experience, the world would not exist. The cubic foundation stone in the underworld is the city of Enoch that Cain built in Nod. Enoch means inaugurate or dedicate. Typically, whenever they erect a new edifice, stonemasons lay a cornerstone to dedicate it. This is the symbolism that applies to the cubic stone down below. Outside of this cube, as Cain has told us in seances, are the prisoners of hell. This may explain why Eliphas Levi's depiction of Baphomet shows him seated on a cubic stone. Similar imagery has been used regarding the white cube of the New Jerusalem at the Apocalypse. 16th century painter Luca Cambiaso depicted God the Father and God the Son sitting in heaven with their feet resting upon a white cube in his La Gloria fresco from the Escorial Palace in Spain. As I stated before, I see, in all of the scriptures, myths, legends, fairy tales, and esoteric literature that I have examined on this topic, a schema of the universe that involves a black cube beneath a white cube, which both, at the end of times, come together in some way. In the midst of the white cube, God's throne sits. This is where it is right now, reportedly, right by the tree of life in the supernal Eden, what we in common parlance now refer to as heaven. Surrounding this realm and protecting it are the four beasts or cherubim and the flaming sword, as represented by the second square in Agio. In Revelation chapter 4 verse 6, St. John describes his vision of it. In the midst of the throne and round about the throne were four beasts full of eyes before and behind. Earlier, when Ezekiel had his vision of God's chariot, he too saw the four guardians and four wheels, each covered with eyes. Again, this makes sense if we view the universe as a panopticon prison, with God's throne in the center surrounded by his omniscient prison wardens, the cherubim, watching the activities of his prisoners locked outside of the gates of his chamber, where Nod, the underworld, chaos, and hell are. Agio seems to me to be a game about capturing this zone. This is what the message from the parchments found by Baron J. Saunier meant when they said, "Destroy this demon guardian at noon." It is about a ritual where you break past the cherubim and the flaming sword to get to the fruit of life, represented by the words blue apples. Remember, Baphomet said that these words referred to blood sacrifice. The zone of Eden, the second square, is, again, the ark and the cubic supernal altar. It is the one box of things where the souls, the blood, and the energy of sacrifice is stored. Remember, Cain told us that part of the goal of playing Agio is to make real AGEI, and that the Agi is also the same as the Sangria. But we know that Sangreal, the Holy Grail, can be broken down into the words Sangreal, royal blood. This refers to the making of the Eucharist on top of the very altar of heaven. While I must admit that my understanding of this mystery given to me is not fully understood yet, I think that part of the game, the most dangerous game of all, involves filling up the box with Agai, or perhaps covering the surface of the box with it, as the Eucharist goes on top of an altar. Cain told us that the AG tokens the bucks go on top of the points, where the grid lines intersect. The other goal of the game is to take the AGI for yourself to reap all the wealth. To do this, you gain the AGEI by surrounding the second square on the Agil. If the second square is the inner cube, that means that, to surround it, you have to double the cube. In other words, you have to build another altar around that one. Then you get all of the sweet gum, the ambrosia inside. This, I think, is what Cain was saying is the game that God is playing with the archons of the underworld. If this is true, then perhaps it sheds new light on some of the most baffling Masonic symbols. There has never been any agreement about what the letter G means in the center of the Masonic icon of the square and compass. It has been suggested that it stands for God, or geometry. But let us just take the letter A, to be implied by the shape of the square and compass put together. Add the sound of the letter A to the sound of the letter G, and you get the same phonetic sounds that you get when you pronounce the word Agea. The Masonic G could be seen as an emblem of the AG formed upon the second square. The latter could itself be implied by the Masonic square symbol, based on the square, a tool used by stonemasons and architects. The presence of the compass tool announces the Masonic plot to encompass it surrounding the second square to claim the Agi. On Masonic tracing boards, the symbol of the square and compass, along with the G, or often in its place the all-seeing eye, is frequently shown in the center of the royal arch, just beneath the keystone, flanked by the two pillars of the temple. This demonstrates the work they are involved in, which they blatantly represent as the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem. The Masons are trying to build their own cube around the white cube. They want to form an artificial temple around the real temple, which, as St. John said, is God himself, the New Jerusalem having no temple other than him. In the Catholic Eucharist rite, once the Holy Spirit is placed inside of the wafer, as I said before, it is put into a vessel called a tabernacle. If it needs to be transported elsewhere, such as to the home of someone who cannot attend church, then it is placed inside of a small box called a PYX. The word is Latin, and it is actually the origin of the English word box. In fact, the term Jack in the Box was originally a derogatory term used by non-Catholics to refer to the host inside of a tabernacle, or PYX, Jack being a slang term for a spirit or a demon. When ceremonial magicians place a spirit inside of an enclosure, whether it's a magic circle or a box or a bottle for a genie, the purpose is always to control it. Similarly, Catholic priests who had been converted to Satanism would try to control the Holy Spirit in the transubstantiated host, the wafer, and use its power as their own. According to Sir James Fraser in The Golden Bough, this secret, evil black mass was called Mass of the Holy Spirit. Recall how Baphomet told us that Saunier got rich by transmuting base metals into gold through the agency of God. This principle of controlling the power of God by surrounding and capturing him is illustrated in chess. Manly P. Hall, in his encyclopedic outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolical philosophy, discussed the esoteric side of the game. He wrote that the pawns represent the 8 parts of the soul, and that the king is spirit. He remarked, "The king, being spirit, cannot be captured, but loses the battle when so surrounded that it cannot escape." Even so, the word checkmate is said to come from a mixture of the Persian shah, king, and the Arabic mat, dead. When the words are put together, the phrase is thought to mean, "The king is dead." This implies that he is as good as dead, even if you don't actually finish him off as part of the game. In Shatranj, a Persian variant of chess and chaturanga, the game is over when all of the pieces on one side except for the king are captured. But remember, Kane told us that in Aguayo, the white side always wins, and kills the black king anyway, no matter what. As for our own Dark Army, the membership of the Ordo Lapsit Exilis and the Dragon Court, most of our guiding lights have passed. Prince Nicholas de Vere von Drakenberg died in February of 2013, seemingly of a heart attack. When the event first occurred, I received a frantic phone call from his secretary, claiming that Nick's fiancée had just called to report that she had found him murdered. The scene was described as that of a struggle. Supposedly, he was lying naked on the kitchen floor, with strange symbols carved into his flesh, surrounded by broken dishes. Later, the fiancée corrected the record. She said that the part about the bloody symbols on his body was actually just a detail of an ominous premonitory dream about his death that she had experienced a couple of weeks earlier. However, the secretary had already gone on a radio program to announce to the world that de Vere was murdered in a Masonic conspiracy directed by the House of Windsor. Typical Dragon Court internet drama ensued, with those closest to him all denouncing each other publicly and P1 aching bizarre accusations. There are, of course, now dozens of copycat Dragon Courts directed by former members of Nick's group, all claiming to be continuing the tradition that he was steward of. I haven't paid attention to any of them. Nicholas was aware of the prognostications about him and the future of Drakenberg that had come to me under the influence of Baphomet. He knew I had been told via the Ouija board that he was destined to be the Antichrist, and that he would somehow gain access to an island where we could establish Drakenberg. He knew that I had channeled information, written in the unpublished Strange Service Manual, stating that he would be sacrificed at the coronation ceremony and possessed by the spirit of Baphomet. He had contacted Dragon Court members in the state of Washington and engage them in trying to find a suitable location to have this ceremony. Several of these members expressed alarm and concern that he seemed to be outwardly attempting to get someone to willingly murder him as part of a ritual. Of course, they wanted no part of it. Clearly, de Vere took these prophecies, as he referred to them, very seriously. While to me, he spoke about them as though they were silly and meaningless, behind my back he was sharing the transcripts and other documents I provided him with other members, trying to get them to agree to work with him to make these predictions come true. But when it came to the topic of ritual human sacrifice, none of his courtiers, as far as I am aware, were interested in participating. This was actually the 5th major death to occur in connection with the Dragon Court since I became involved in 1999. I mentioned previously that his previous webmaster, who had a falling out with Nick and began using the court's own website against us, died of his brain tumor shortly after getting involved in an online spat with me and Brian. Within a year of this happening, the next person who took control of the Dragon Court website, a disgruntled former fan of Nicholas de Vere, also died suddenly of a heart attack. He was in his early 50s. The editor of de Vere's book, The Dragon Legacy, died unexpectedly as well. Most notably, Lawrence Gardner, his rival, whom he claimed had plagiarized him, also died. In March of 2012, I discovered the body of Brian Albert in one of the closets in our home in Vancouver, Washington. He had killed himself with carbon monoxide gas. We had been having marital problems after 10 years of marriage and over 20 years of friendship. It was the most devastating loss and traumatic experience that I have ever had to bear. I miss him every day. He was irreplaceable in so many ways. Every time I make a major new discovery in my research, I wonder what he would have thought, and about all of the great ideas that he would have contributed. I hope that he is happy now, wherever he is. Incidentally, I have now been a student of the Invisible College now for 13 years. According to Plutarch's description, I have completed my period of servitude to the headmaster of the school. I have paid my tuition. I am now eligible to decide whether I want to return to the land of the living or stay and continue my education. Take that to mean what you will. In closing, I would like to express my profound appreciation for all of the legionnaires, quartermasters, and navigators of the Ordo Lapsat Exilis, as well as to all of the many donors, fans, and other contributors who have helped us along the way, even the apostates and the enemies. I am sure we all recall the earnest spirit of selfless giving and of the daring pursuit of knowledge in which we each joined this quest together. I am equally sure that this intention will be taken into consideration when our souls are weighed in the balance at the end. Stipendia enim peccatim mors gratia autem de vita aeterna in Christo Iesu Domino nostro. Romans chapter 6, verse 23.
Article 41 of 41.